So, hello, my name is Brian Smith and I'm recording this lecture for the Bocconi Alumni group. Unfortunately, we have a technical issue with the recording of the actual meeting, so this is a follow-up recording for those who either attended and want to see the lecture again, or those who weren't able to make the meeting on the day. So I'm going to talk today, as the slide shows, about the evolution of the life sciences industry. And Dawn's Medicine is the title I give it because it's the book, the name of the book that this presentation is built on. So let me go straight into it. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're a Martian. You're a Martian business school professor, and you've just landed on Earth to examine our life sciences industry, the pharmaceutical, medical technology and diagnostics and related industries. What would you see? Well, you'd see thousands, tens of thousands of companies. But you'd see some strange things if you looked in the industry press. So you'd say, for example, that one really smart bunch of guys at Pfizer have decided to exit Alzheimer's therapy area, even though it's a huge market. And you'd see that there's another group of equally small guys at Biogen who are investing lots of money in exactly the same area. It doesn't seem to make sense. They seem to be contradicting each other. You'd see that there's a real crisis about the need for new antibiotics, and yet the antibiotics business model seems to be broken. It's dependent upon government aid. And you'd see really clever companies like Sanofi exiting the diabetes market, even though there are millions of people needing diabetes treatments. And those same companies are investing lots and lots of money into products that only seem to serve very, very small numbers of people that we call the rare disease business or the orphan drug business. Very strange. This wouldn't make sense at all to our Martian investigator, would it? And you notice that these 10,000 companies, or tens of thousands of companies, they all, if you look at the mission statements, if you go into their offices and see those plaques up on the wall, you see that they all have pretty much the same mission statement: to enable human health, to prolong, extend, and improve human life. And that even though they all have the same mission statement, they're all 50% of the business is based in one country, which is crazy because, of course, the issues of human health are spread all over the world. So this business is very unevenly spread around the world. You'd see that even though they all have exactly the same goal, there are lots and lots of different business models. You could look at, for instance, an Indian generalist company and a Swiss research-based company and see completely different business models, and yet they would claim to have the same goal, same mission. You'd see that these companies, even though they're very clever and very advanced, they can't actually make medicines themselves or devices themselves. They depend upon contract sales organizations, contract research organizations, buying in intellectual property from smaller innovative companies and so on. And even when you think about these big value chains that make the medicines, even they can't fulfill their mission on their own. They only work when they integrate with other value chains of health service providers. So it's a strange sort of thing that you would see if you came down from Mars. It doesn't seem to add up. And you might go back to your spaceship and you might be about to leave Earth and think, this is very odd. But then you might think for a moment, just before you got on your spaceship, you might realize that there's something else on Earth that looks very much like the pharmaceutical industry, the life sciences industry. And that's life on Earth. So all life on Earth has one goal, one mission, which is to reproduce. They share the same mission statement, if you like, all species. And although only a third of the land surface of the Earth is land, the surface of the Earth is land, 80% of all life is on land, and only 20% of it is on the other 2/3 of the Earth, which is on the sea. you'd see that even though all life on Earth has one mission statement, there are 8.7 million different ways of doing this. And you'd see that these 8.7 million species all exist in long, fragile food chains, a little bit like the disintegrated value chains that I talked about in our industry. And even those long, complex food chains are heavily integrated with other food chains in heavily integrated food webs. So in fact, you'd see a lot in common between life on Earth and the life sciences industry. And this is important to a management scientist like me, an academic researcher like me, because it means that if you see these commonalities, it suggests that there's a common theory, a common explanation underlying these two phenomena that explains both of them at the same time. And then our Martian friend might come across the writings of a guy called Theodosius Dobzhansky, a very brilliant Russian monk. And in 1970, he wrote this: "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." In other words, evolution explains everything in biology. And then our Martian might come across the words of this man, Stan Metcalf, who said, "Evolutionary theory is a manner of reasoning in its own right, quite independently of the use made of it by biologists. They simply got there first." In other words, Stan Metcalf is saying that evolution is not a biological theory. It's a theory for explaining any complex adaptive system. It just happens that biological systems and business systems, like industries, are complex adaptive systems. And both are explained by evolutionary theory. So I take their ideas, I steal them, and I weld them into one and say that nothing in the life sciences industry makes any sense except through the lens of evolution. All of those crazy things I talked about that seem to make no sense, they make sense if you think in terms of evolution, as I'm going to explain. Now, many of you watching this will have at least high school biology, so I don't expect this slide to be a great surprise to you. You know, don't you, that a population of organisms, animals and plants on this earth that have the same traits, we tend to call a species. They have the same phenotype. Okay. And a phenotype is characterized by the traits of its anatomy, its physiology, its behavior, and so on. But it gets that phenotype from its proteome, from its collection of proteins that make it work. Okay. And that proteome, that set of proteins, is the result of expression by its genome, its set of genes. And that set of genes is the result of a sequence of base pairs. This is high school biology, I'm sure you're familiar with it. But in my work, there's a directly equivalent. So we call a group of companies that have the same traits, the same phenotype, the same structure, strategy, cultures, and so on. If they're the same, we say they are the same business model. And that business model comes about because of its capabilities, or to be more accurate, its complete collection of capabilities, its capabilium. And its capabilium is expressed by a whole load of little routines that every company has. So every company has thousands of routines for everything from conducting a clinical trial to ordering some new stationery. And those routines come about through these things called microfoundations, which we'll come on to later, but are things like the attributes of the individuals and their skills and the way that they're connected and organized together. So what I'm saying here in this slide is that there are direct analogies between life and businesses, between and life and industry. And that's important because it allows us to understand how industries like the life sciences industry evolve. So if you look at this chart, for example, on the left here, we see the standard model of evolution in biology. You have a population of genes, the generic term for them is replicators, because they can be copied, they store information and can be copied. That population, some variation occurs within it. That leads to a variation in traits of the organisms, you know, a long neck or a big brain or a pale skin, whatever it is, which is selected for or selected against by the environment. That leads to the amplification of those traits, the long neck in the case of a giraffe, the big brain in the case of human beings, and that leads to the emergence of new species. Standard model of evolutionary biology. But on the right, we see exactly the same model working in businesses and in industry. You have an organization of replicators, things which store information and can be copied. We call them organizational routines, those little sub-processes I talked to you about. You get variation within them. That leads to variations in structure and strategy and other organizational traits. Those are selected for or against by the business environment, which leads to the emergence of populations with different traits, which we call the emergence of new business models. So I hope I'm not overemphasizing the point, but the point I am trying to make is that what we see in an economic system, like an industry, like our industry of the life sciences, is not like evolutionary biology. It is evolution. It's exactly the same. I'm not making a metaphor. I'm drawing a direct parallel between the two. And this has an important implication to our question, because in this lecture, what we're trying to address is the issue of how will the industry evolve? Well, the answer is in the slide. If you want to know how the industry will evolve, you have to look at the selection pressures that act upon these variations. This is the key question to ask. And in my research, I look at these, the way these selection pressures are changing. It's a very complex picture. And I'm going to go through them, but not great detail. I want you to just try and grasp the key elements of this I go through. So the first thing we see is something that we call the value shift, a shift in the way that value is defined and by whom it is defined. And this shift in the environment means that certain types of business models which create customer perceived, context specific, health economic value are favoured, and business models which just create clinical value without health economic value are now disfavoured. And on the left we have the reasons for that. The second shift is the globalization shift, and this is a shift in the environment which favours, forgive me stumbling my words, favours companies that can operate globally and recognise heterogeneity across the world rather than deliver narrow value to narrow clinical categories. The third shift is one that I call the holobiont shift. This is a shift that favours the competitive entity not being a single company, but a network of companies. The fourth shift it's called the systemic shift. It relates to the nature of medicine and how it's carried out. The healthcare is now proactive, personalised, participatory, where it used to be reactive, population-based and hierarchical. And that change favours certain types of business models and not others. The information shift, as I call it, favours companies that can use technology use information on a large scale, integrated, pervasive manner. It's very different from how it used to be used. And on the left again we have the reasons for that. And then finally, what I call the trimorphic shift favours companies that focus on either being technically excellent or very cheap, or very good at tailoring what they offer to the marketplace. Okay. The reasons for this are on the left, but it's another shift in the environment that favours a certain type of business model against the old business models. Incidentally, for those of you watching this, all of this detail is captured in a whole series of articles which I've supplied to Bocconi alumni and is available to you. So in short, there were 6 great shifts happening in the industry environment, and those 6 shifts favour certain aspects, traits of business models, and disfavour others. Just like 6 million years ago, there was a shift in the environment in the African jungle, which turned it into savanna, which favoured upright walking, large-brained apes, which became you and I, and disfavoured our ancestors. It's, as I said, I'm not making a metaphor, I'm not saying the figure of speech that what is happening in our industry is like evolution. I'm saying that what is happening in our industry is evolution. in the Darwinian sense. So if you accept that premise that these 6 great shifts are happening, and they're acting on business models in the industry, selecting for some types of business model and against other types of business model, what future do we expect to emerge? Well, I go back to that diagram that I mentioned to you a second ago. We ought to see the emergence of the amplification of successful variants and the emergence of new business models, and in both biology and in business. But in biology, of course, we call them species. So those of you who've done any sort of biology at high school will have seen a chart like this. This is the tree of life, as it's sometimes called. And it explains how all of the different species on Earth, all 8.7 million of them, emerged from one life form by natural selection. So this implies then that if we're seeing a large shift in the environment in the life sciences industry, we ought to expect to see something similar, something equivalent happening in our industry. The splitting, the divergence, what's called a radiative adaptation of business models in the life sciences industry. And indeed, that's what we see. So we see the splitting between these companies that either are technical innovators or are customer intimate, either tailor their value proposition very closely, or they are operational excellent. In other words, they're very inexpensive, have low cost bases. And if we look, and then we see further splitting in exactly the same way between companies that choose to serve government or institutional payers versus companies that choose to target patients who pay for themselves. Focusing in on one part of that, we see further splits between companies that choose to make discontinuous radical innovation versus incremental innovation. Companies that choose to focus on one type of technology versus those who try to integrate multiple types of technology. Those that target large markets that have large opportunities but large risks versus those business models that choose to target small markets with smaller returns but smaller risks. And in this part of the environment, you see it's led to the emergence of 8 business models. So we see like companies like Roche that are aiming for their secular grail business models, I call them. Companies like Gilead with Sovaldi and a budget buster business model. Companies like Bayer with Eylea, which is a traditional blockbuster business model, and so on and so forth. But this is just one fraction of this tree of life, this speciation in the industry. And my work, in fact, identifies 26 different business models emerging in the industry. Again, it's a very complex slide. I don't for a second expect you to take all of this in the time I've got to show you it, but there are PDFs available for you to see this in full detail on request. And we see examples of all these companies emerging in the marketplace. I'm not going to labor it, but it's all available in my book, and some of it's mentioned in the short articles I've sent you. This diagram contains exactly the same information as the previous tree of life diagram. Each of these peaks corresponds to one of those 26 business models. This type of diagram is known as a fitness diagram, and biologists use it in their work. The point I'm trying to get across here is that each of these individual peaks is fit in an evolutionary sense. It will survive in the environment. But if you try to straddle between them, you end up falling into what's called a fitness trough. And we see this all the time, don't we? If you try to be a company which is innovative, but not as innovative as the most innovative, and inexpensive, but not as inexpensive as the cheap companies, the generic companies, then you end up falling between the two. You don't get market access, for example, because you're neither cheap nor innovative. And as I say, the details of this diagram are given in the PDF that I've supplied. So I want to move on to what are the implications for you personally, because I'm probably much older than most of you, and I've been in the industry for 42 years. And I try to imagine what I would say to myself if I was if I was at the beginning of my career, or perhaps really what questions you can ask, you would be telling yourself if you from 2060 was talking to you in 2020. And I think there are three key lessons to learn. One important implication is that good health outcomes won't any longer be delivered by the old business models. Okay? Business models will change, they'll reinvent themselves, and you will need to understand these new business models. The traditional big pharma business model is splitting and fragmenting. It's not disappearing, but it's splitting and fragmenting. You'll need to understand all of them if you want to have a career in the industry. Nor will a good outcome be delivered only by a good clinical outcome. Increasingly, all business models have to deliver a good health economic outcome. So that means that you won't just have to understand the science and the clinical stuff, you'll have to understand how health economics works. In future, if you don't understand how health economics works, you probably won't survive in the industry. And finally, that value won't only be delivered by traditional small molecule chemistry, by pharmacology. Okay. In future, health value will be delivered by a combination of digital health, personalized biologics, bioelectronics, cell and gene therapy, a whole range of technologies. So if you want to thrive in the industry, you'll need to understand more than what the traditional small molecule chemistry that I grew up on. And that's about what I want to cover today. I've kept it short and succinct because all the detail is in the articles that I'm providing to go with this. But I do want to continue that game I said just a little bit longer. I want to imagine that down a wormhole in time has appeared in front of you, yourself, but yourself from 2060. So at the end of your career, perhaps. What would your future self be likely to say to your present self? Well, I think the following. They'd obviously say work hard, get the best degree that you can, best qualifications that you can. They'd also say that when you're looking for a job, don't choose one just based on the salary or the city that it's in or its title. Choose one where you will learn, because that's where you'll be happiest, when you're constantly learning. I think your older self would also say to you that if you're going to work in this business, you have to remember that you don't work in the pharmaceutical industry or the medical technology industry. You work as part of a much broader, wider healthcare system. Your older self would also tell you that even when you've got an excellent degree, you should commit yourself to continuous education. This is an industry where you just have to keep learning all the time. And the final thing that I think your older self would say to you, in fact, and I'm certain that I would say to my younger self, is to remember that even though your job is very important, it's very important to do interesting work, fulfilling work. Your life is really like a three-legged stool, like one of those stools that milkmaids would use in the old days to milk a cow. And there are two other legs of your life in addition to your work life that are equally important. So my final piece of advice to you, if I may, is in addition to your career, make sure you look after your own health and find yourself somebody to love. So that's all I've got to say in this lecture. There are all the details that I wanted to mention are in the PDFs that I've sent, and in the book Darwin's Medicine that I mentioned. I'll be very happy to take any questions if you want to write to me individually. Bocconi, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I hope you found it interesting, and I look forward to giving another lecture to the Bocconi Alumni Group at some future date. So thank you very much for that.